Kemi's name became synonymous with worthlessness in her village, though she had done nothing to deserve such cruelty. She grew up in a prosperous kingdom known for its skilled craftspeople, born into a merchant family that was already considered unusual. Her father, Adeyemi, was Yoruba, a proud man with deep connections to ancient traditions and storytelling. Her mother, Chidinma, was Igbo, a woman of outstanding beauty and practical skills who had married for love despite her family's initial objections. Their union was rare in those days, when people mostly married within their groups. This intercultural marriage brought both richness and challenge to their household. Adeyemi named their youngest daughter Kemi, a Yoruba name meaning "cherish me," hoping she would embody the best of both worlds. Her older sisters, Amara and Zara, bore Igbo names from their mother's heritage, creating a family that reflected two cultures, two ways of seeing the world. Amara, the eldest sister, was a master weaver whose fabrics were so beautiful that nobles traveled from distant kingdoms just to buy them. She had inherited their mother's practical Igbo sensibilities and took pride in creating tangible, valuable things. She was confident and admired and praised constantly for her work. Zara, the middle sister, was a brilliant potter whose vases and urns decorated the royal palace itself. She too had learned her craft from their mother's side of the family, becoming witty, popular, and always surrounded by admirers who marveled at her creations. Both sisters seemed to take after their mother's people, focused on craft and production. Then there was Kemi. While her sisters worked at their looms and pottery wheels, creating beautiful things that everyone could see and touch, she did something different. She listened. She sat with people, absorbed their stories, and paid deep attention to words and silences. Her father recognized those skills as a Yoruba gift, the ancient practice of preserving wisdom through oral tradition, but even he wished she would develop something more visible, more marketable. Every day, Kemi would sit with the elderly people in her village as they told their long, rambling stories. She would comfort crying children, listening to their small troubles with complete attention. She spent hours beside sick neighbors, just listening to their fears and memories, asking questions, remembering details, and never interrupting anyone. Her sisters hated this about her. "Kemi sits and does nothing all day," Amara would say with disgust in her voice, speaking in the sharp, practical way their mother had taught them. "At least sweep the floor if you're going to be useless," Zara would add with a cruel laugh. Even her parents grew frustrated with her, though for different reasons. Her mother worried she would never find a husband or support herself. Her father worried that she was wasting the gift of listening by not pairing it with something more concrete. "How will you survive in this world?" he would ask, shaking his head sadly. The whole village had a name for her: Kemi the empty-handed. There was one person who never made Kemi feel worthless, though. Her name was Mama Saad, an ancient woman Kemi visited every single day. Everyone else dismissed her as senile and crazy, saying her mind was gone and her stories were nonsense. But Kemi loved sitting with her in the small, dusty room that smelled of herbs and old memories. Mama Saad told strange tales about the old ways and the language that was lost, stories that mixed Yoruba traditions with even older knowledge that predated the kingdom itself. She would murmur odd phrases in words Kemi didn't understand, sing haunting melodies that made her skin tingle, and speak of how their ancestors communicated with spirits through specific sounds and deep attention. Kemi didn't understand most of what she said, but she listened with the patience her father had once possessed before worry overtook him. She memorized the strange phrases, absorbed the forgotten words, and let the stories settle deep in her heart like seeds waiting for the right season. Everyone laughed at her for wasting time with a confused old woman, but something inside Kemi knew these hours mattered. One terrible morning, everything in the kingdom changed. Kemi woke to the sound of crying and shouting in the streets outside their family compound. People were running toward the town square, their faces filled with fear and disbelief. She rushed out of her house and joined the crowd, her heart already sensing that something momentous had occurred. The news was devastating. Princess Adana, the king's only daughter and the kingdom's greatest hope, had fallen into a mysterious sleep. She lay in her royal bed barely breathing, completely unresponsive, and no one could wake her no matter what they tried. The king had immediately summoned every physician, healer, and wise person in the land. They tried medicines from distant places, prayers to various deities, and ancient rituals passed down through generations. Nothing worked. The princess remained trapped in her strange sleep, growing paler and weaker with each passing hour. The entire kingdom fell into deep mourning. Their beloved princess was dying before their eyes, and no one understood why or how to save her. 3 days after the princess fell ill, a mysterious wanderer arrived at the palace gates just as dawn was breaking. He was a blind oracle, dressed in tattered robes that had seen many roads, but he carried an air of great power that made even the guards step back respectfully. The king, desperate for any possibility of help, allowed him to examine Princess Adana. The oracle spent a long silent hour beside her bed, his unseeing eyes somehow perceiving what others could not. Finally, he spoke words that sent chills through everyone present in the royal chamber. "The princess is trapped between 2 worlds," he announced in a voice that echoed strangely, as if coming from somewhere both near and far. "A curse has been spoken over her in the ancient tongue, the language our ancestors knew but we have forgotten. Only someone who can hear what is not spoken, who can listen beyond words, and who knows the old stories and the lost language can possibly save her." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on every heart. "You have 7 days, or her spirit will fade completely and she will die." Then he turned and walked out, vanishing into the morning mist as mysteriously as he had appeared. The king was desperate, his grief mixing with fierce determination to save his only child. He made a proclamation that was announced by royal messengers in every corner of the kingdom. Any woman who believed she could save Princess Adana was invited to try, regardless of her background or status. The king's nephew and heir to the throne, the prince, promised to marry the successful woman and reward her with half the kingdom's wealth. This announcement sent every ambitious woman in the land into a frenzy of preparation. Hundreds began gathering elaborate solutions, traveling to distant places to collect rare herbs, planning complex rituals with multiple steps, and crafting objects they claimed had magical properties. In Kemi's household, her sisters were absolutely thrilled by this opportunity. "Obviously one of us will succeed," Amara declared confidently, already planning her approach. "We are the most talented women in the entire region. Everyone knows our work." Zara nodded in eager agreement, her eyes shining with ambition. "Perhaps I'll craft a sacred vessel specifically for a healing ritual," she said, her mind already racing with designs. They spent days in intense preparation, certain that their visible skills would save the princess and win them unimaginable wealth and status. As her sisters prepared their grand attempts with great fanfare and confidence, Kemi couldn't stop thinking about Mama Sada's strange stories. She remembered all those hours listening to her rambling tales about the language of spirits, and the ancient words that could speak to the unseen world. Everyone had dismissed the old woman as crazy, her mind too far gone to make sense, but Kemi had listened carefully to every word. She had memorized the strange phrases that seemed like nonsense, the odd melodies that followed no pattern anyone recognized, and the forgotten words Mama Saad would murmur during her most confused moments. Kemi didn't fully understand them or know what they meant, but they were stored somewhere deep in her memory, preserved like treasures she hadn't known she was collecting. She also remembered stories from other elders she had sat with over the years, tales of curses and dark magic, of how the ancient people communicated with spirits through specific sounds and deep, patient listening. A realization began forming in her mind. Life had been teaching her something all along, preparing her for a purpose she couldn't yet see clearly. All those dismissed hours, all that useless listening, might not have been wasted after all. The day came when women from across the kingdom gathered at the palace, creating a spectacle unlike anything the kingdom had seen. Hundreds arrived in elaborate processions, each bringing solutions they were certain would work. There were famous healers carrying rare herbs from distant mountains and foreign lands. There were priestesses with complex ritual items blessed by various deities. Rich women offered priceless gold and jewel sacrifices. There were sorceresses attempting powerful counterspells they claimed could break any curse. The palace courtyard was filled with confident, talented women, all certain they would be the one to succeed where others failed. Among them stood Kemi's sisters, dressed in their finest clothes that showed off their status and success. Amara carried a beautifully woven cloth, which she claimed contained magical intentions woven into every thread. Zara brought an ornate vessel she had crafted specifically for this moment, decorated with symbols she insisted held spiritual power. They held their heads high, proud and sure of themselves. And then Kemi arrived, wearing a simple dress with no decoration, carrying nothing but a small cloth bundle that held her few possessions. The contrast was stark and humiliating. The moment her sisters spotted Kemi in the crowd, their faces turned red with fury and embarrassment. "What are you doing here?" Amara hissed at her, grabbing her arm roughly enough to leave marks. Her eyes burned with anger mixed with genuine embarrassment. "You'll humiliate us in front of everyone," Zara snapped, her voice shaking with rage as she looked around to see who was watching their family drama unfold. "Guards! This girl has nothing to offer. Remove her immediately." People began turning to look at them, nobles and common folk alike drawn by the commotion. Kemi saw them whispering behind their hands, pointing at her simple appearance, and comparing her to her elaborately dressed sisters. Some laughed openly at the contrast. "That's the empty-handed girl," someone said loud enough for her to hear clearly. "What could she possibly do to save a princess?" another person asked mockingly, sparking more laughter. But just as the guards moved toward Kemi with apologetic expressions, an old court attendant stepped forward with surprising authority. His voice was firm and kind as he made an announcement that silenced the mockery. "The king's decree said any woman in the kingdom may try," he stated clearly, his eyes daring anyone to contradict him. "Even her. That was the king's word, and it will be honored." One by one over the following days, the women attempted to save Princess Adana, and one by one they failed in increasingly dramatic ways. Kemi watched carefully as each confident healer, priestess, and sorceress discovered that their solutions were powerless against whatever held the princess. The princess's body rejected the healer's medicines, causing her to convulse violently and grow even weaker than before. The priestess's rituals produced no effect whatsoever, their chants and offerings falling into empty silence that felt almost mocking. The sorceress's spells either backfired dramatically, harming the casters themselves, or simply fizzled into nothing like candles blown out by an invisible wind. Then came her sisters' turns, and Kemi watched with a mixture of hope and sadness. Amara draped her enchanted cloth over the princess with great ceremony, speaking words she had memorized from an old book of rituals. Nothing happened at all. The cloth lay there, beautiful but ordinary and completely powerless. Zara placed her sacred vessel beside the bed and performed an elaborate ceremony that took nearly an hour. The vessel remained completely inert, just pottery no matter how lovely its design. Both of Kemi's sisters left the chamber deeply humiliated, their faces dark with failure and wounded pride. Days passed quickly. The deadline approached like a storm on the horizon. Princess Adana grew paler and weaker, her breathing becoming shallower with each passing hour. As Kemi watched all these failures unfold, she noticed something strange that no one else seemed to see or care about. The royal advisor, a powerful man named Ogun trusted completely by the king, appeared oddly calm and composed throughout this crisis. While everyone else showed appropriate fear, desperate hope, and crushing disappointment, he appeared almost satisfied with each failure. There was something in his eyes that didn't match his concerned words. Kemi remembered something Mama Saad had once told her during one of her rambling stories that others dismissed as the confused talk of a damaged mind. "The greatest evil often hides in plain sight, child, wearing the most trusted face and speaking the sweetest words." Using the observation skills she had developed through years of patient listening and watching, Kemi began studying Ogun carefully whenever she could do so without drawing attention. She noticed him murmuring under his breath when he thought no one was watching, his lips moving in patterns that seemed purposeful. She saw him making subtle hand gestures toward the princess's chamber when others were distracted by their grief. His lips moved in sequences that seemed strangely familiar, and then suddenly she recognized them. They were similar to the dark phrases Mama Saad had warned her about in her stories, old words that could harm rather than heal, that could bind rather than free. A terrible realization struck Kemi with the force of lightning splitting a tree. Ogun himself had cast the curse on Princess Adana. He had betrayed the king's trust in the most horrific way possible. He planned to let the princess die slowly and publicly, then use the king's overwhelming grief and perceived weakness to turn the council against him and seize power in the chaos that would inevitably follow. It was a perfect, patient, evil plan. But Kemi had no proof beyond her observations, nothing concrete she could present to authorities. She was just empty-handed Kemi, the girl with no skills and no value in anyone's eyes. Who would believe her accusations over the word of the respected royal advisor who had served the king faithfully for decades? She said nothing about her suspicions, but she watched Ogun constantly, noting everything. She saw the barely concealed satisfaction in his eyes when another healer failed. She noticed how he subtly discouraged certain approaches that might have accidentally worked, steering people away from anything involving ancient languages or spiritual communication. He was carefully protecting his curse, ensuring no one could break it before the deadline passed. The seventh and final day arrived, and hope had completely died in everyone's hearts throughout the kingdom. The princess was barely breathing now, her skin almost transparent like parchment, her pulse so weak the physicians could hardly find it. The king sat beside her bed, holding her cold hand and weeping openly, not caring who saw his tears. The prince paced helplessly outside the chamber, his face aged by grief and helplessness. Together, the entire kingdom mourned, certain that a curse no one could break would soon take their beloved princess away forever. That's when Kemi finally stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I wish to try," she said quietly but clearly enough to be heard throughout the chamber. The court erupted in laughter that was almost cruel in its intensity. Even in their grief, even after days of failures, people couldn't help but mock her audacity. "The girl with nothing," someone shouted with disbelief. "What could she possibly do that all these talented women couldn't?" Another voice called out mockingly. "She has no skill, no knowledge, no craft, no training," a noble woman declared loudly, and others nodded in emphatic agreement. Her sisters, standing in the crowd, tried to physically drag her away, their faces twisted with embarrassment and rage that she would shame them further. "You're making us look like complete fools," Amara whispered harshly, her grip painful on Kemi's arm. "Everyone is laughing at our entire family because of you," Zara added, her voice shaking with fury and humiliation. But the king, broken by grief and desperate beyond all reason, raised one trembling hand to silence the room. His voice was hollow with overwhelming sorrow but still held a thread of hope, thin as spider silk but present. "Let her try," he said softly, his words falling into the sudden quiet like stones into deep water. "What more can we possibly lose? My daughter is dying. If there's even the smallest chance." His voice broke and he couldn't finish. The room fell into heavy silence, the mockery dying away into uncomfortable awareness of the king's pain. Everyone stared at Kemi, some with pity for her coming humiliation, most with contempt for wasting precious final moments, and a few with curiosity about what the strange girl would do. Kemi walked into Princess Adana's chamber with steady steps, and the heavy door closed behind her with a sound of finality. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching through the windows, waiting to see her fail like everyone else, and have their low expectations confirmed. Everyone expected her to do something dramatic, wave herbs around with mystical gestures, chant loudly in impressive voices, and perform some elaborate ritual with many steps. Instead, she did something that confused and frustrated them all. She sat down beside the princess in complete silence and simply remained there, absolutely still. For a full hour, Kemi sat there without moving or speaking, appearing to do absolutely nothing. She listened, not with her ears alone, but with something deeper that she had developed through years and years of patient attention to others, of sitting with the elderly and the suffering, of absorbing stories and silences equally. She listened to the room itself, to the air moving through it, to the silence that held secrets, and to the space between moments where truth often hides. Outside the chamber, she could hear people growing increasingly impatient and angry. "She's doing nothing whatsoever," voices whispered harshly. "Just sitting there exactly like she always does, wasting time," someone said mockingly. "This is a complete waste of precious final moments with the princess," another voice complained bitterly. But Kemi continued listening, going deeper and deeper into the silence, waiting for something she couldn't name but somehow knew was there. Then she heard it, faint as butterfly wings, almost imperceptible, but definitely real. A whisper was emanating from Princess Adana herself, not from her mouth, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere between this world and another realm entirely. The princess was speaking in a language no one had used for countless generations. Her voice trapped in a place most people couldn't perceive. The words floated in the air like smoke, barely substantial but definitely present for those who knew how to listen properly. Kemi recognized fragments from Mama Sada's stories, pieces of the ancient tongue the old woman had taught her without either of them understanding why it mattered. The princess was trapped in a conversation with a dark spirit, bound by questions posed in the old language. Questions she couldn't answer because she didn't know the lost words needed to respond. The spirit held her suspended between worlds, feeding slowly on her life force, waiting patiently for her to fade completely into death. Kemi understood now with perfect clarity what she had to do and why life had been preparing her so carefully. The present was her purpose. All those dismissed hours sitting with Mama Saad, all that useless listening that everyone mocked, all those strange phrases she had memorized without understanding, they had been training for this exact moment. She had been prepared quietly, invisibly by life itself. Kemi began to speak, her voice not loud but carrying a strange power that made the air vibrate. She used the ancient phrases Mama Saad had taught her, words that had seemed meaningless before but now flowed from her lips with perfect purpose and authority. Kemi spoke the counterphrases to Ogun's curse, the proper responses to the spirit's binding questions, and the releases from the ancient contracts that held the princess captive between life and death. The room grew suddenly, unnaturally cold, as if winter itself had entered through the walls. Shadows in the corners began moving in ways that defied natural law, stretching and twisting in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Some people watching through the windows gasped and backed away in fear, their mockery completely replaced by terror at what they were witnessing. Kemi continued speaking steadily, having a careful conversation across the veil between worlds, negotiating with forces most people never knew existed. The spirit challenged her repeatedly, testing whether she truly knew the old ways, whether she had the authority to say these words. She answered each challenge calmly, using everything Mama Saad had taught her, drawing on everything she had absorbed from years of patient listening to elders who carried fragments of ancient knowledge. Her father's Yoruba heritage and her mother's Igbo wisdom merged in her voice, creating something powerful and unique. Suddenly, the chamber door burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. Advisor Ogun stood there, his carefully maintained mask completely shattered, his face twisted with rage and panic. "Stop!" Ogun shouted desperately, his voice cracking with fear and fury. "You don't know what you're doing, foolish girl. You'll destroy everything." But his panic revealed everything he had tried to hide. His reaction was far too strong, too fearful, and too desperate to be the response of an innocent man concerned for the princess. The guards immediately became suspicious, their hands moving instinctively to their weapons as they reassessed the trusted advisor. Everyone watching suddenly understood with dawning horror. Ogun was somehow involved in this curse, perhaps even its creator. Kemi didn't stop speaking. She couldn't stop now, not when she was so close to breaking through the dark magic that bound the princess. Her voice grew stronger and more confident as she felt the spirit's hold beginning to weaken and crack. Ogun began chanting his words frantically, trying desperately to reinforce the curse he had so carefully cast weeks ago. Dark energy filled the room, making it difficult to breathe, pressing down on everyone present with suffocating weight. A magical battle was unfolding before their eyes, but it wasn't fought with swords or flashy displays of power. It was fought with words and intentions, with spiritual authority that came from truth and genuine love versus lies and consuming hatred. Kemi spoke the final phrase, the most important and powerful words Mama Saad had ever taught her, words the old woman had made her repeat until they were carved into her memory. They were words calling upon the protection of their ancestors from both her father's Yoruba lineage and her mother's Igbo heritage, asking them to break the chains of dark magic and restore what had been stolen by evil. The moment those words left her mouth with absolute conviction, a sound like shattering glass filled the entire chamber, echoing off the walls. Everyone felt it in their bones, a breaking, a releasing, a great darkness being torn apart and dispersed. Princess Adana gasped suddenly and dramatically, her chest rising with a deep, shuddering breath that brought color flooding back into her face. Her eyes flew open, clear, aware, and fully alive. The curse had shattered completely, broken by words spoken with love and proper authority. At the exact same moment, Ogun collapsed to the floor screaming in agony, his body convulsing. His own dark magic had rebounded on him with terrible force, the curse he had cast turning back against its creator, as such magic often does when properly countered. Guards rushed forward immediately and seized him as he writhed on the ground, no longer able to deny his guilt. The battle was over. Life had prepared Kemi for this moment, and she had not failed. Princess Adana's voice was weak but clear as she spoke her first words after days of silence. "He cursed me," she said, pointing at Ogun with a trembling but certain hand. "I heard everything while I was trapped between worlds. He wanted the throne desperately. He planned to blame my father's weakness and seize power after I died, and the kingdom fell into chaos." Guards dragged Ogun away roughly as he confessed everything under the weight of his failed magic and the princess's damning testimony. He would face execution for treason and dark magic, crimes that carried the harshest punishment in the kingdom. The king embraced his daughter tightly, tears of joy streaming down his weathered face, his body shaking with relief and overwhelming gratitude. Then he turned to Kemi and did something that shocked everyone present. He fell to his knees before her, a king kneeling to a girl everyone had called worthless. "You saved her," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You saved everything, my daughter, my kingdom, my heart. And we called you worthless. We called you empty-handed. We mocked you and dismissed you. Please forgive us." The entire court watched in stunned, absolute silence, staring at Kemi, the girl they had all dismissed and laughed at just hours before, now revealed as their savior. The prince approached Kemi slowly, his face serious and filled with genuine respect. "The entire kingdom owes you an unpayable debt," he said formally, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. "You will receive the promised reward, marriage to me and half the kingdom's wealth." Everyone held their breath, waiting to hear her answer, expecting her to accept eagerly as any sensible person would. But Kemi had learned something profound about herself through all of this. She had discovered that her true value wasn't measured by wealth or status or the admiration of others. "I don't need half your wealth, your highness," she said quietly but firmly. "And I don't wish to marry for reward or obligation. But I would ask for something else, something that matters far more to me." The king leaned forward eagerly, ready to grant anything. "Anything at all," he promised solemnly. "Name it, and it is yours by royal decree." Kemi took a breath and spoke her heart's true desire. "Build a house of listening, a place where the elderly can share their stories and be truly heard, where ancient knowledge can be preserved and honored, and where people can learn that sometimes the most powerful skill is simply paying deep attention to others. And please, let Mama Saad be honored as a teacher of ancient wisdom, not dismissed as senile and worthless." The request was so unexpected, so selfless, that the court stood in amazed silence before breaking into thunderous applause. The king granted Kemi's wish immediately and joyfully, adding even more honors than she had requested. The House of Listening was built with royal funds and became famous throughout the land and even beyond their borders, drawing people who wanted to learn the ancient art of truly hearing others. Kemi was named Royal Keeper of Ancient Knowledge, given a beautiful home near the palace, and treated with deep respect by everyone who had once mocked her. Mama Saad was brought from her small cottage to live in comfort at the palace, finally recognized and honored for her wisdom instead of dismissed as a confused old woman. Her eyes sparkled with joy when Kemi visited her in her new rooms. Kemi's sisters stood in the crowd during the celebration, their faces burning with shame that would take years to fade. Their confident pride had crumbled into humiliation. The prestigious engagements they had been so proud of were broken off immediately, their reputations damaged beyond repair. They were now known throughout the kingdom as the sisters who mocked the savior, a title that followed them everywhere. But weeks later, something unexpected happened. The prince continued to visit Kemi at the House of Listening, not out of obligation or royal decree, but out of genuine interest in who she was. He would sit quietly during her lessons, learning alongside others, and slowly, naturally, they began talking in ways that had nothing to do with curses or kingdoms. One evening, after a particularly beautiful lesson about patience, he approached her with a gentle smile. "I would be honored if you would consider marrying me," he said softly. "I am not asking you to marry me because of any decree or reward. Rather, it is because I have observed you over the past weeks and months. I have seen your wisdom, your kindness, and your incredible strength. I truly admire who you are, Kemi. I would like to learn from you for the rest of my life." Her heart, which had been so often hurt and carelessly dismissed, felt something completely new. Genuine love freely offered. She accepted his proposal. Their wedding was a celebration of everything she had learned. That life prepares us in ways we cannot see, that dismissed skills often hold the greatest power, and that listening is its own form of profound strength. Mama Saad sat in the place of highest honor, smiling proudly. Years later, the kingdom prospered under the rule of a prince who had learned to truly listen and a girl who had always known how. The story of empty-handed Kemi became a teaching tale told to children across many kingdoms, reminding everyone that the greatest power often looks like nothing at all, until the moment it becomes everything.